by Brigitte Bertz. He continued performing his experiments in different institutions, the most famous among them, the Institut Laue-Langevin in Grenoble, France, where he spent 1 year as a guest and contributed in building a beta NMR spectrometer until 1979. In subsequent years, up to 2000, he kept doing his research at several beta NMR spectrometers in Heidelberg, Gießen, Berlin, all in Germany. Up to 1995, he performed experiments on matrix spectroscopy in Marburg at the Berlin Electron Storage Ring Society for synchrotron radiation and at the Hamburg Synchrotron Radiation Laboratory. In 1978, Professor Stockmann obtained his habilitation and became professor of the University of Marburg in Germany. By the time of 1988, Professor Stockmann came to the quantum chaology motivated by fundamental questions on this subject. Being recognized as an authority, he served as spokesman of the German Research Foundation Research Group 660, a scattering system with complex dynamics from 2007 to 2010, and by his spokesman from 2010 to 2013. Also, in 2005, he was editor by the Journal of Physics A, Mathematical Journal of the Institute of Physics, among other activities. Pursuing his goals, he became a pioneer in conducting microexperiments to get an understanding of the wave function through the study of ancillary microwave systems. In the quest of satisfying his scientific curiosities, he had to develop a novel experimental technique. This led him to write 2 books about quantum physics. One of them, Quantum Chaos: An Introduction, was published in 1999, where he introduces the quantum mechanics of classically chaotic systems. The second book, Quantum Physics: The Bottom-Up Approach, co-authored with Dirk Dobbers, was published in 2012. Professor Stockmann's contribution to quantum chaos have widely motivated and helped to a deep understanding of the wave nature in complex systems, chaotic and disorder, using microwave experiments. His scientific achievements led him to be recognized as an authority by the scientific community in the area. Professor Stockmann has established a lot of collaboration in Slovenia, France, Brazil, among others. In particular, in Mexico, he has been in touch with several groups. He is a regular visitor of the scientific gatherings at the Centro Internacional de Ciencias in Cuernavaca, Morelos, invited by Professor Thomas Seligman and Dr. Rafael Méndez Sánchez from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, where Professor Stockmann has been especially recognized. In Puebla, he had a long-term cooperation with the group of Professor Félix Relev and Germán Luna from the Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla. At the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, he had a successful cooperation too. The work of Professor Stockmann has spurred an intense research activity in the quantum transport through complex systems, from which several publications in prestigious journals have emerged. The logistic method of this group has been successfully applied by the Mexican group of Waves and Materials, addressed by Drs. Gabriela Baez, Dr. Méndez Sánchez, and myself. This group has presence in several parts of Mexico. Although Professor Stockmann is now retired from his academic activities at the university, he continues with his investigation and maintains a close relation with the Mexican groups and visits our country frequently. Several times I have heard him to say, "Fortunately, I look like a Mexican." Congratulations, Professor, dear Professor.
Now, Professor José Luis Hernández Pozos, head of the Physics Department of the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, Campus Iztapalapa, award Professor Stockmann with the medal, Leopoldo García Colín medal.
For the benefit of the public, I will read the diploma. It reads, the 6th Leopoldo García Colín meeting on mathematical and experimental physics awards Professor Dr. Hans-Jürgen Stockmann, University of Marburg, Germany, with the Leopoldo García Colín Schirer Meeting Medal for his outstanding contributions in the field of quantum chaos, Mexico City, September 9, 2016. Professor, thank you very much. Very well deserved, thank you. Please accept this medal on behalf of Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana and for your contributions in physics. Thank you very much.
Estimados colegas, queridos amigos, es un gran honor para mí recibir la medalla García Colín y quiero dar mis gracias a ustedes. No estoy seguro si la amerita. Hay muchos colegas que son más calificados que yo, particularmente en física estadística, la disciplina preferida de Leopoldo García Colín. Pero es verdad que hubo muchas colaboraciones y intercambios entre colegas de este país y mi laboratorio en Marburgo que fueron más exitosas y quizá han darme el premio también por eso. Algunos de estos colegas están aquí y quiero dar mis gracias también a ustedes por sus colaboraciones que siempre han sido una alegría grande para mí. Mientras tanto, he visitado este país muchas veces y estimo este país mucho, estimo la gente. Y espero que esta vez no es mi última visita aquí. Gracias.
Okay, before we proceed to the talk of Professor Stockman, I want to thank Professor Luis Felipe Rodríguez and all the staff of El Colegio Nacional, in particular Maestro Fausto Cerón, for the warm hospitality, the usual warm hospitality that we offer to all of us during the celebration of this meeting. Thank you very much, and we proceed with the talk of Professor Stockman. Thank you.
Okay, I want to give here an overview over the microwave experiment in complex systems we did over the years in Marburg, from quantum chaos to monster waves, and as you will see during this talk, also on the way back from monster waves to quantum chaos. Is it possible to remove this? Okay, thank you. I will start with a short historical survey, and then I will discuss here a number of systems. I have not the time to enter into all the details, so but I want to show you that our technique is not restricted exclusively to quantum mechanics systems, but we can also start a number of other systems. And here I will discuss tight binding systems, freak waves, and the last part, these are very new results. I will give here an account on our new results on GSE graphs. So I think the whole history starts with this publication. This was a publication I had together with my co-worker at this time, Jürgen Stein, the title Quantum Chaos in Billiards, Studied by Microwave Absorption. Probably you cannot read the text, therefore I will read it for you. The eigenfrequencies of resonance cavities shaped as stadium or Sinai billiards are determined by microwave absorption. In the applied frequency range, the used cavities can be considered as two-dimensional. For this case, quantum mechanical and electromagnetic boundary conditions are equivalent. And the resonance spectrum of the cavity is, if properly normalized, identical with the quantum mechanical eigenvalue spectrum. So this is the idea, and this idea showed up to be extremely fruitful in the past years. Since there's a one-to-one correspondence between stationary Schrödinger equation and Helmholtz equation, where the electric field, I will explain it in a moment in more details, corresponds to the wave function, and this opens the possibility to study quantum chaos by means of classical waves. In fact, when we submitted the paper, this parentheses were missing. But one of the referees, though the report was very positive as a whole, he or she complained It is not really quantum chaos. It is wave chaos, and therefore you should use here this parenthesis. Of course, the referee was right. What we are doing is wave chaos. It is not quantum chaos, but this is the label which had been attached to this work. Okay, here you see the experimental setup. It is extremely simple. In fact, our students now use such a systems setup in their practical exercises. The actual experiments, of course, are more involved. So the idea is very simple. We have here a bottom plate, we have here a cable, and here we have an antenna. And the resonator is formed by the bottom plate and by this cavity. And there you should know that there are different types of mode in such an electromagnetic cavity. The modes we usually use are the so-called transverse magnetic modes, which means that the electric wave field vector goes from top to bottom, and the magnetic fields are here in plane. And as you all know, the electric magnetic boundary conditions demand that the electric field vector is always perpendicular on metallic surfaces. This is automatically the case here and here. It is not automatically the case here, so you have to demand that the wave function or the electric field must be zero here at this outer boundary. Which means that you have here really a one-to-one correspondence to quantum mechanics, including the boundary conditions. So this corresponds to a quantum mechanical system. And in the spirit of this equivalence, you see here, you see here a resonator of the shape of a quarter stadium billiard, then this corresponds to the quantum mechanical spectrum. And when you look into such a spectrum, it looks noisy. And the question arises immediately, what can we do with such a spectrum? And the same problem was present at in the 60s in nuclear physics. So nuclear physics, the people measured large number of spectra, but the details of the nuclear interactions were not yet known. And there a very simple approach came up, namely just to look for the spacing of neighboring levels. And there's a common practice to normalize the mean level spacing to 1. And here is a qualitative difference between the spectra of integrable systems and non-integrable systems. Here we have a rectangle. A rectangulum is an integrable system, and which means that in this case the spectrum should be Poisson distributed, which means that the eigenvalues are uncorrelated. I will go into these questions later in some more detail. And what you are seeing here, okay, it fits quite good here. It does not fit very good here. And here you see already the problem of the experimental approach. We have always an antenna in our system, and this antenna destroys the integrability. So systems like this are called pseudo-integrable. And the pseudo-integrability leads to a repulsion of nearby eigenvalues, so this produces a hole here. This will not be my topic here, I just want to mention it. And here you have a chaotic system. So the rectangle is made chaotic just by removing a quarter circle. And this belongs to the class of Sinai billiards. Here it is sufficient. Here then it is chaotic. And here you see a completely different level spacing distribution. So here you see a linear level repulsion. You have a clear maximum at some intermediate level spacing, and you have a Gaussian decay here. So it is very well described by this Wigner distribution. And we will meet this distribution repeatedly during my talk. So this is the situation. So this you can do with spectra. And then what you can do more of them, then here you see the same transparency again. If you now look here into the spectrum that you measured, then you see the depths of the resonances are very different. They are very small one, they are very deep one. And the explanation is also simple. If this antenna is just at the nodal line of the wave function, I always use the term wave function, but you always have to keep in mind, in reality it means the electric field. So if the antenna is here at the nodal line, you cannot couple the electromagnetic energy into the cavity, and then you miss the resonance, or maybe it is very small. If, on the other hand, you are close to the maximum, you get a very deep resonance. So it is also possible to map the wave functions, and this is why the upper part of the cavity can be moved with respect to the lower one. And then you can, if you just map the depth of a resonance as a function of the position of the antenna, then you get an image of the wave function. And this you will see here. These are wave functions obtained by our students in their practical exercise. They use exactly equipment like this, exactly this problem. This is used by the students in their practical exercises in their third year of the studies. We can do it much better, and I will give an example later. Here in this particular case, there's a specific feature. You see that the field is not distributed evenly everywhere, so you have a particular high amplitude close to classical periodic orbits. This feature had been called scarring by Heller, and here you have this feature, so-called bouncing ball orbits. This also is not my topic, I just want to mention it here. And now I want to give a short overview of what has been done in the last, meanwhile, 25 years. And I also want to do this to give credit to the cooperation with the people from this country. So we started with quantum chaos. Then here, the next one is we looked for semi-classical quantum mechanics. This means you go in the regime where you can describe the quantum mechanical system by classical trajectories, but you have to take care of the wave nature, which means that here essentially you have classical mechanics plus a de Broglie relation. So the difference between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics is just, in quantum mechanics you have to add up the amplitudes, and classically you have to add up the intensities. Then here, we did a lot measurement of transport through the periodic and disorder structure. And here is a really strong input from the people here in Mexico. We started with Felix Israelev, who at this time, when we started it, he was still in Germany, Arkady Krokin at this time in Mexico, and Nikolai Makarov. And then later with Antonio Mendes Bermudez and Herman Luna Acosta, who even stayed for 1 year in Marburg to do the experiments. Then random matrix C. There we did really a lot of work with François Levrat, Thomas Seligman, and Thomas Gorin. At that time he was still in Germany, but meanwhile, as you know, he is here in Mexico in the University of Guadalajara. Then we studied transmission reflection properties of cavities, cooperation with Rafael Mendes Sanchez. He also stayed a couple of months in Marburg to do experiments, and with Moises Martinez Mares. Then we studied dielectric resonators. We studied pseudo-integrable systems in more details. I mentioned already a system is pseudo-integrable if it is it's integrable plus some antenna or some point like scatterer. Open billiards. And then this also, then we started with tight binding systems in Marburg. One example is microwave graphene. And these experiments are now continued with a really strong input also from Mexico in the group of Ole Kuhl, my former co-worker, who is now in this. And finally, we studied frequencies. On these two subjects, I will give go somewhat more into the details. And on microwave graphs, and this will be the main topic at the end of my talk. Now let's go to this system. And yes, I would mention that here only the cooperations with the colleagues from Mexico are mentioned explicitly. There are many more international cooperations which are not here mentioned on this transparency. Okay, tight binding system. This is a technique which is a very versatile one, and this is why I want to explain it here in some detail. So in this context, we do not use microwave resonators. So in a sense, our resonators now are small dielectric cylinders of the size of some millimeters, and a high index of refraction, n equals 6. I mentioned in the beginning that we usually use the so-called transverse magnetic mode with the dipole antenna perpendicular. It is not shown here, but if you do such a measurement, then you get this. Here we have shown 1 minus the reflection, so the resonances which in reality go down are no go up. But there's also another possibility, not to study the transverse magnetic modes, but the transverse electric modes. And then the roles of electric magnetic fields are just interchanged. So which means that in this case, the magnetic mode goes from top to bottom, and the electric mode is in plane. And in order to excite them, you need such an antenna with a king. So it excites the electric mode in this direction, which means now the electric field is in plane, and then automatically the magnetic field is perpendicular. And if you do this, then you obtain such a spectrum. You still have the resonances from the transverse magnetic antennas, and this is not a very clean arrangement. But what you see here is a very sharp additional resonance. And this is the resonance we need for this purpose. Why is it so sharp? So here we are in the situation that the field distribution looks like this. The field distribution within these dielectric disks, you have an ordinary Bessel function, in this case J0, but in the outside the electric field is evanescent, which means in the outside is described by a K0 Bessel function. And this is essential for this purpose, which means that in this case, the single resonance you may interpret as a tight binding state. In a sense, you just think of a hydrogen atom of the ground state. So this is exactly the behavior you have for atoms. And this becomes more clear now here. If we just bring two of these disks together, you see we have here an exponential decay of the electromagnetic field. You have an overlap, and from this overlap you have an interaction. Yes, and from standard quantum mechanics, you know you have a split of the two states in a symmetric and an antisymmetric one. And this you are seeing here. If you have here a very small distance, this is a low stress, and you have a large splitting. If you increase the distance, so the splitting becomes smaller and smaller. So this is the starting point. And now we can start to build up larger molecules, so to say. And this we did here. So we continue with the benzene. In fact, this was also first done by our students, just as a demonstration of group theory. So we have here just a regular arrangement. And from group theory, you expect that there are two singlets, two doublets. This is what you see. And you may already imagine that these are singlets and these are doublets, a slight broadening. You see it in more detail if you destroy the symmetry, just removing here one of the disks apart, and then you see here the doublet split, which how group theory works. And this is really, on this level, a nice illustration in the students' equipment. But then we can go further, and then we continued by starting graphene-like structures, which were very popular at this time, and still are very popular. And then we have here the point, and then you measure the spectrum. But here you have a problem. I mentioned already in the beginning that the depth of the resonance depends on the field strength, on the value of the wave function at the position of the antenna. This means that you do not really measure the density of states, the spectrum. You measure density of states weighted by the square of the wave function of this point. And this is called by the people working in the community the local density of states. So if you just do the measure with just one antenna, this is not the density of states, this is the local density of states. So what you can do now, you do measurements at many different positions and superimpose the results, and then you arrive at such a thing. And now you see you can realize quite nice a triangular gap which is expected from these graphene-like structures. I mentioned already, I want to stop here at this point, I mentioned already this these experiments have been continued by Ole Grub and co-workers with influence, also with people from Mexico. I would mention here in particular Alexander Franco. He was in Nice to do some of the experiments, mainly on graphene-like structures, graphene ripples and this looking for exchange, quarter-set and all this. Very beautiful experiments. I'm unfortunately no longer a co-worker in these works. Okay, now freak waves. There are many different names of these freak waves. They are called freak waves, they are called monster waves. And the question is, do they really exist? Meanwhile, this question has been settled, but about 30 years ago, this was not the case. There had been many reports by sailors on waves which arrive suddenly, disappear suddenly, and which really makes that's a problem. But there had been no written records. And this changed in the new year, 1995. This is an oil platform in the North Sea, and they register regularly the elevation here of the water surface. And here you see the record. You see here the overall elevation is of the order of 8 to 10 meters, not unusual for the season. And then suddenly, an event arrives, disappears. The whole event lasts only about 20 seconds or so. This is more or less which had been reported by the sailors. And here, at this point, it is clear this event exists. It had been there. And there's meanwhile also a huge number of impressive videos in the internet. If you are interested in it, just look into the internet, YouTube or so, and you find a large number of these things. So there's no longer a doubt, freak waves do exist. Then the next question, what is the explanation of these freak waves? The simplest models assumes that just we have a random superposition of plane waves arriving from different directions. The very assumption is known in quantum chaos as Berry's conjecture, the very same thing. And if you define the intensity as the square of the heights, then you add this quantity. So the intensities decay exponentially, the heights decay with a Gaussian behavior. And it is known that the large heights are underestimated by orders of magnitude. So this is just not true. Now then, what is the explanation? And the experts agree. And essentially this is a Russian school, so to say. So colleagues from Russia already in the 80s developed models on nonlinear wave equations. And they really found beautiful analytic solution of them. And they wanted to keep them. So they prefer nonlinearities. And there's even a statement in one of this. There was an volume where number of these results had been collected. And then you can really find in the editors section, linear theories can only produce Gaussian distributions. So large waves would have very small probability. This was a statement. So I think nobody doubts nonlinearities are important. There are many features in wave propagation which really need nonlinearities. But this is not true. There's an alternative, and this had been ignored for many years. And maybe also our experiments on this subject maybe shed some focus on it. So here you see what has been overlooked. If you have a sea floor with varying depths, the usual situation, then it may happen if you have gravity waves. Gravity waves are waves where the wavelength is large compared to the depths. Okay, the ocean depths are some kilometers, but the waves for tsunami, for instance, are of the order of maybe 100, even several hundred kilometers. So this definitely is true for tsunami waves. They are gravity waves. And in such a situation, the wave velocity is depth dependent. It's just given by this quantity here, where lambda is the wavelength, d is the depth and g, of course, is Earth's gravity. What happens with the wave front? You show it here. So the speckled background is just the assumed variation of the seafloor. Then you here approach, and occasionally Perhaps we should first look here. So you have a distortion of the wavefront, and here you have a critical situation where you have been folding over. If you project this folding over on the direction of propagation, you get here sharp horn-like structures. For classical, in the classicalization, these are divergences. If this is a wave situation, which is here the case, so these divergences are smeared out over the scale of the wavelengths. Okay, here you see the same in some other picture. And these features here give rise to caustics. And in the caustics, there may be an excess of height with respect to the average by a factor of up to 5. Okay, and this is now, it had been overlooked for reasons I don't know, since these features are well known in optics for centuries, but that's the situation. Then there had been some calculations. Here you see a calculation of a tsunami event, which was triggered here by a sea quake close to the coast of Japan, and this were calculations, just using this model. You see, it is more or less you can map it onto the optical situation where the variation of the sea floor can be mapped on a position-dependent index of refraction. That's it. There's a one-to-one correspondence. And here you see his features. You see here even one feature which arrives the coast of California, which had been observed and even here led to a fatal accident. Okay, and this is what we can do in our experiment. You see here the apparatus, so the scale, you see here the scale, so this more or less, this are 50 centimeters, here this is about 1 meter. Here you see some, so these are the objects which we are used to vary the depth. So here the top plate is missing here, so you should imagine a top plate parallel to the bottom plate. So this is the situation that here you see here this spherical caps, and what you see these caustics. This is why I called it here the ocean in the lab. So we scale down the ocean with a size of several thousand kilometers down to our lab with size of 1 meter about. What you also see here, the caustics need some time to appear. They need a minimum travel distance to appear. And this distance depends on the variation of the seafloor, of course. And there, in fact, there is an interesting scaling relation, which I do not show here, which relates the first appearance of the caustics to the variance of the seafloor variation. So if you have the depth profile, so you can predict the mean distance. In fact, the seafloor is known, so you can calculate the variance. The variance is available, but you cannot calculate the individual caustics. Since the uncertainties are such, you can calculate some caustics, but the uncertainties are such that you cannot calculate the individual pattern. But still, you can calculate the mean distance, and for usual seafloor variation, the usual tsunamis, this means that you have typically several hours to warn the people. Okay, here I could spend much more time, but this should be sufficient here. And now I come to my last large part of my talk, the GSE graph. I will explain here the abbreviation in the moment to those among you who are not familiar with it. And here I will go a bit more into details as I'm accustomed to do in public talks, since I know that a number of the people from the quantum session are interested in the details. And I will start with a tutorial which hopefully is sufficient for the non-expert to know what I'm talking about. Here again, the transparency you know already. Now I want to go somewhat more into more details in the origin of this level splitting. And this is the essential point in what comes now. And to this end, I show here just what is called spectral level dynamics. So we just measured the spectrum of such a Sinae billiard as a function of this length. So we measured it for many different lengths, so we have many different spectra. And for each of the spectra, so the mean level spacing is normalized to 1, which means that each of these eigenvalues just performs a to and fro movement about the average value. And now if you look into the details, you see many avoided crossings. There are no crossings left. Maybe here sometimes the resolution makes this statement questionable, but more or less you see there are no remaining crossings. And this is typical for chaotic system. The origin of this avoided crossing is just this quarter circle. Maybe you also recognize some structures going through it. These are remnants of the spectra of this rectangle. So here you are these bouncing ball states which I showed before, and they give, if you have the rectangle, all of you know these are very regular spectra which can be calculated elementary. You saw it here. So if you remove this, then you have a large number of crossings. And this means that the eigenvalues are uncorrelated. And this means then that you have a Poissonian spectrum for the mean level spacing. But here the crossings are converted into avoided crossings, and this suggests that you just now use a 2x2 matrix approach. You may imagine, if you have such a situation, the essential things happen just here at this point. So let us discard all other levels and just let us concentrate on this situation. So in each Hamilton operator can simulate it by a 2x2 matrix. A, C, B, B asterisk is always their mission. And in this what is called random matrix approach, we assume that all these matrix elements are Gaussian random variables. So they are uncorrelated Gaussian, and now there are 3 different possibilities. One possibility which gives rise to the Gaussian ensemble holds if you have time reversal symmetry and no spin 1/2. In such a case, the Hamilton matrix, which is always Hermitian, is even symmetric, which means B asterisk is B. B conjugate complex is B. And this means that the off-diagonal elements here are just described by one parameter. And this gives rise, is a very simple calculation. Then you can calculate the ensemble average density of state, and then you arrive just at this Wigner distributions I have shown you before, and which describes nearly perfectly the level spacing distribution for the CNI billiard. And there are an abundant number of experimental realizations. Next situation, we break time reversal symmetry, and then B and B complex conjugate are different in the general case, which means that you now need 2 parameters to describe a matrix element, namely the real part and the imaginary part. And this gives rise to a quadratic repulsion. And there's a small number of realizations with microwaves. We had very early, there's another realization in the group at this time of Edward Ott, and later they had some realization with microwave graphs in the group of Leszek Zierko in Warsaw. And now the last situation, the Gaussian symplectic ensemble, describes the situation which is still lacking, the time reversal symmetry with spin 1/2. And now we have the peculiar situation that now each matrix element here can be described as a sum over quaternions. Maybe you are not familiar with them. I will explain them in the moment. Don't just assume, just take this for granted. Now here you have, each matrix element is described by 4 parameters, B0, Bx, By, Bz. And this gives rise here to a quartic level repulsion. You see these 3 different ensembles essentially can be distinguished by this different level repulsion. So this Gaussian decay is always the same. And these constants here, which are different, you have two normalization conditions. One normalization is trivial, so PSF normalized over all S must be 1 is a distribution function. And then the second normalization, we always normalize the mean level spacing to 1. You can do the thing analytically, and this is the result. So again, each B is now described as in terms of four Gaussian variables. These taus are the quaternions, so each of them squares to -1, they anti-commute, and the product of two of them gives the third one. So they may be considered as a generalization of the imaginary unit. And up to now, there had been no experimental realization. And this is now our issue. You may wonder, why are these random matrices of interest at all? Maybe you play with some features. They are not relevant, but this is not the case. And here this is famous conjecture by Bohigas, Giannoni, Schmidt, which meanwhile has been proven in major parts, namely that the universal features of the spectrum of the chaotic systems are well described by random matrix theory. Which means if you have a real system, be it a nucleus, be it an atom, if it is chaotic, be it a microwave cavity. They show the same universal features, for instance, this level spacing distribution. And here you see a number of examples taken from my book. So this is a level spacing distribution for a Sinai billiard. This for a hydrogen atom in a strong magnetic field. So the hydrogen atom is usually considered as regular. It is in the low states. But if you have a strong magnetic field, and if you go to the so-called Rydberg states, close to the ionization threshold, and where the magnetic interaction becomes comparable to the residual electric interaction, then even the hydrogen atom becomes chaotic. So this is a level spacing distribution. This is with a moderate statistic, the level spacing distribution of a molecule. This is a spectrum taken, the vibrational spectrum of a quartz block. This is three-dimensional microwave resonator, and this of a vibrating plates. And here are experiments done here in Mexico. And if you look into it, so only 3 of these examples are quantum mechanical, these 3. Here you have not even a correspondence to quantum mechanics, which means that this approach goes beyond quantum mechanics. And it shows, if you are interested in the individual properties, you can take microwave systems. With a huge advantage that you can vary parameters deliberately, which obviously you cannot do with nuclei. You have to take the nuclei which are offered to you by nature. So this is maybe our advertisement. If you are interested in the universal feature, and this restriction is essential, you can do with microwave experiments everything which is interested. And this is also why we have a very strong cooperation with many theoreticians who are interested in these results. Let me come back to these quaternions. Okay, if you look at a typical spin Hamiltonian, it looks like this. So this maybe is a Hamiltonian of the atom, and then you have here spin-orbit interaction. If there are a magnetic interaction, everything breaks down. If you apply magnetic field, you have broken time reversal symmetry, you arrive at the unitary ensemble. So let's assume you have no magnetic field applied, but we have a spin-orbit interaction. Whereas you all know the angular momentum is described by 1/I times gradient, and the spin can be described in terms of the spin matrices. And just because of this 1/I's, which we have here, it's inconvenient. So you have imaginary matrix elements here, you have the 1/I here, and this is why it is useful to introduce the quaternions, just by absorbing this 1/I into the spin matrices. Now you have these 3 quaternions, and this means that now the matrix elements are quaternion real. Exactly what I showed you before. Can be expressed in terms of the three quaternions and the unit matrix, and the coefficients are real, which would not be the case with, if you take the spin matrices, just because of this 1/I. And now you see, and this is a central point, I would say, the matrix elements commute with the operator C, which means the complex conjugate, and this tau y. It's obviously true here. Tau y commutes with tau y, and it is real. Here it's different, tau x, anti-commutes with tau y, but this is compensated for by the complex conjugate. The same for tau z. So you have the symmetry, and now it's just a very simple quantum mechanical exercise. First of all, this t squares to -1. This -1 is very important in the following. And now this means if you now have, if psi n is an eigenfunction to the eigenenergy n, then this is again quantum mechanics. T times psi n, it is 2. And they are linear independent. Here this -1 comes in. This is a simple calculation, which means that each eigenvalue comes in pairs. So these are the so-called Kramers doublets. If you apply a magnetic field, you have a splitting. This is the well-known Zeeman effect. Okay, and now and this is here, which will become important in the following. So we have an anti-unitary symmetry T, anti-unitary because here a complex conjugate is involved, T square -1. This is sufficient to observe Kramers doublets and GSE statistics in a chaotic system. You do not really need a spin. You need a system obeying this symmetry. And this was a clever idea of our colleagues and friends in Great Britain. They suggested to do an experiment within such a graph. So what do we have here? We have two geometrically identical subgraphs. The difference is you have here a phase shift within the bonds. Phase shifts break time reversal symmetry. So if you look just on one of the subgraph, you expect GUE statistics of the Gaussian unitary ensemble. Here you have the same subgraph, but you have here, it is in the opposite direction, which means that one subgraph is a complex conjugate of the other. Or if you think in terms of orbits, you have the same orbits here and there, but they are transverse in opposite directions. This is one ingredient. Then we have here two connecting bonds. And this is another ingredient. So altogether you have here an inversion symmetry. And here you have a zero at this point, which means the wave functions go just through. And here you have a pi, which means here that the wave functions change their sign. Now let's see what happens. Here T, this is just, we go just here, so this is just this identity. Here we go along this bond, this is minus sign. And if you do both of them together, T square equals to -1. Which means this graph obeys the statistics we need, and the message and the claim is we should observe for the spectrum of this graph GSE statistics. You may also look onto the subgraph in some different way. Just maybe this corresponds to spin up, this corresponds to spin down. And this minus sign corresponds to the fact that for spinor rotations, you need not a 2 pi rotation, but a 4 pi rotation. So everything is in it. Here maybe I would like to make a historical remark, so to say. History in this case means 3 years. At this time, my last PhD students performed his PhD thesis, and we already stopped our experiments in Marburg. And then I, with my former co-worker Uli, we attended a conference in Dresden. And then Martin Sieber, whom we know very well anyway, he presented this idea. And already during the talk, we began to think, is it possible to do such a thing? At the end of the talk, I had an idea, then we discussed it, and on the basis of this idea, we wrote an application at the German research agency, got the money. We have a new co-worker, Abdu, and he did really beautiful experiments. So, but it cannot be done just like this. So we took over the idea, but the realization is different. And this I want to explain to you now. So these are our two subgraphs. So they are put on, there's just a photograph. It is not so easy to identify them, so you see them. This is one subgraph, this is the other subgraph. And how do we achieve the fact that these two subgraphs are complex conjugates of each other? Okay, the main ingredient is what is called in microwave technology a circulator. Here you see how it works. For a circulator, a microwave entering here, leaves there. microwaves entering here leaves there, and microwaves entering here leaves there. So they introduce a sense of rotation. Okay, now it's easy. So you have here one of the circulator. Here you have the other one, but with the opposite sense of rotation. And then here we have the same, which could be done with this pi shifts in the bonds. I know of no easy way to do this experimentally. But this is available. So this is a standard microwave device. And if you do this, then you have here the same situation. Two graphs. The trajectory are followed in opposite directions. So if you describe this in terms of Hamiltonian, you can describe this in terms of the complex conjugate. How we realize the effects, now you have here this bond. What we need then too, here you have no phase shift, and here you have a phase shift of pi. And this is done by phase shifters. Phase shifter is here, so a phase shifter works like a trombone, so to say. So you have a new part, and if you pull it out, then the overall length is changed. So what you are really doing is you do not change the phase, you do change the length. So this is this delta L. This delta L is the difference of the length between these two bonds. It can be done with these two phase shifters, and you can control it. This can be done automatically. So this is the length difference. The length difference corresponds to this delta, to the phase difference with this factor. But in order to achieve this pi, then you see this delta phi depends on the frequency. In the more here, it looks like a drawback, but we will see. In reality, it showed up to be even an advantage. And now here, what we did here. So this is a large number of spectra. Here's this delta L. So again, this delta L is the length difference between these two bonds. And each line corresponds to one transmission spectrum, where we converted, here we show the modulus of the transmission, where we converted the spectrum into a grayscale. So 0 means 0 transmission, and white means the maximum transmission. And then we stacked onto each other altogether, I think, 400 different spectra with 400 different delta Ls. As I mentioned, this condition depends on the frequency, and it's a hyperbolic dependence. So here on this line, you have this delta phi equals pi, and here you see even the next step, delta phi equals 3 pi. So this is unwanted, and this is from here to here, we just divide it out. So we rescaled this axis now in going from delta L to delta phi just by considering this factor. Okay, and now what you see here, this is now we are on the base. Here we have now a spectrum independence of the difference, on the difference dependence of phi. What we need is this pi. So this is a situation which is needed for the realization of the symmetry. In fact, we have it for all phase differences. So we have done even more. We had to do it anyway because we could not do this directly. We had to do this first. But we have now these results. Okay, and what do you see here? You see here strong here you see star, really is very dark. In fact, the transmission here at this line is about 10% of the average transmission. What happens? It is an interference effect. If you just here, I showed you the graph again, and you can imagine. So each trajectory from the entrance port to the exit port comes in pairs. One of the trajectories passes through this bond, the other trajectory passes through that bond, and if there is a phase difference of pi, you have a destructive interference. In between, for 2 pi, you have, on the contrary, you have a constructive interference. So this dark region here already shows that we were successful in realizing the symmetry we need. And you see also a periodicity with 2 pi. You see it here, for instance, so these patterns you see here repeat here. So occasionally we use also, or up to use also this line to make the analysis. Now we are interested in the spectrum at this line. But on this line there is nothing. But there's nothing only for the transmission. For the reflection effect, we have here even and slightly enhanced reflection just because of this. Now for the determination of the spectrum, we turn to the reflection. And here you see the reflection spectrum. Yes, just a small part, and again in a grayscale. Here again, so the reflection goes down, so each black valley corresponds to a reflection. And now I think this is the central figure of this work. You see the Cramer doublets appear. Along at this line, you see you don't see the doublets here, but you see the splitting of the doublets if you leave this line. You see it here, you see it here, you see it here. And please believe me, you see it for the whole frequency regime which was accessible. Accessible was a frequency regime from 6 to 12 gigahertz, so quite large, with altogether about 100 to 150 resonances. And you see here, so the splitting here is quite large, here is small, but it is observable anywhere. And this splitting has a direct correspondence to the application of the magnetic field for a real spin system. For a real spin system, the magnetic field gives rise to a splitting of the Cramer's doublets, the Zeeman effect, and here the same happens if you here go from the pi line to other values. So in a sense, this in a generalized sense, this is again a Zeeman effect. And what you also see, this is what I just explained to you, and you also use what you see here is a clear tendency towards an equal spacing. It's not exactly equal, but there are no close spacings. And this is also already a clear fingerprint of the Gaussian symplectic ensemble. If you have such a strong level repulsion, S to the fourth, this gives rise to just to a more or less equal level spacing. And here you see the result, altogether 1,000 eigenfrees entered. So this is the GSE result, here just for comparison, the GUE comparison. And I hope all of you agree that we have a better, maybe even a good agreement with this GSE line. There are smaller deviations perhaps, but I have not time to explain it here in details. You don't see here this quartic level repulsion. In order to see this, you can do somewhat more. For this, it is of advantage not to look into the level spacing distribution, but into the integrated level spacing distribution and plot this on a log scale. If you do this, then you obtain this. So probably you are not, so the dashed line is a theoretical exploitation, can be done analytically. And this straight slope here reflects this, corresponds in this case because it is the integrated level spacing distribution. Due to this integral, this S to the fourth turns to the S to the fifth. So this line corresponds to 5. And here, this is here the experimental result, and it fits nearly perfectly over 2 orders of magnitudes. Here I have to admit I did not expect this. This was also for me a surprise that it worked so good here. Okay, and this is the first experimental realization of the Gaussian symplectic ensemble after 50 years of random matrix theory. I'm at the end of my talk. Here I want to thank first my co-workers. I started the experiments with Jürgen Stein. Ole Kuhl had been my major senior scientist over many, many years. He runs a group of his own in NIS, and a number of you know this group. Ruven Höhmann and Senja Barkhofen did the experiments on freak waves. Markus Allgeier, and then in particular Abdur Rahmanjang, he did the experiment for these GSE graphs. These are the corporations, our partners, which had been involved in these experiments. Erik Heller and Lars Kaplan in the freak waves. Also Ragnar Fleischmann and Jakob Metzger von Göttingen. And Chris Joyner, Sebastian Müller and Martin Sieber. They gave the idea to this graphs with its anti-unitarities varying to t-1. We have to thank the editors of the PRL who had been so kind to select this as an editor's highlight. The experiments have been supported over the years by the German Research Agency. We cannot complain, definitely not. And I want to thank you for your attendance.
What is the difference between a freak wave, a tsunami, and a soliton?
Okay, so freak waves or monster wave, or in German, also monster wave, this is just a term which just collects all of the features. So in the beginning, it just, I think the definition was if the height is by a factor of maybe is 5 standard deviation or something like this, beyond what is expected from this Rayleigh model. I don't know the exact definition, but there's a definition in terms of standard deviation, so this is called a freak wave, first of all. And then the solitons, and also a number of analytic solutions which are called peregrine breathers. These are just maybe these are just possibilities to explain this. So with the solitons, or there you have the feature, if two solitons cross, for instance, the intensities do not just add up, but they are squared. So this is just one possible model which can be derived from the non-linear wave equation. Okay, this was part of the answer. I think there was.
And tsunami was. Yeah.
And tsunami is what is generated just by a sequence, typically close. Yes, and tsunami. I think tsunami is more or less describes the origin of the waves. All the other things more or less describes the transport of the waves and maybe the piling up. In fact, in Hamburg, in the group of Norbert Hoffmann, they do experiments in a water tank. They just study the propagation of waves over a distance of 30 meters or so. And if they tune the initial conditions in a proper way, then they can observe this piling up of what they call Achmediev breathers. So then really you see it's very impressive. There's also a video somewhere in the internet. It comes and they have a small ships on this water channel, come up and the ship goes down. Yeah, so this describes the transport of the waves and possible mechanisms how the wave amplitude may pile up. Also with this caustics. So the caustics are a way to explain the high amplitudes. They are just generated by the underground. But tsunami, okay, this is just the event. You have usually a local, more or less localized point where you have the sequence localized in comparison to the typical wavelengths, and then the waves start. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have you thought about astrophysical applications of your work?
Astrophysical. Oh, this is
because if the vector distribution is valid over 12 orders, yeah,
okay,
it should be also in
astrophysics. I am not sure whether you would call this an astrophysical explanation. But we can construct, of course, non-Euclidean matrix. You see, if you vary the index of refraction, this is already, you can explain it in terms. So either you just say you have this index of refraction is more or less corresponds to a potential, but you can incorporate into the Laplacian, and then you have this Laplace-Beltrami operators. Is this astrophysics, cosmology, or not?
Please.
Two questions. The first one is there is the possibility of observe these freak waves in earthquakes. As you know, in Mexico we have earthquakes. And the second one is possible to make this Gaussian symplectic ensemble in billiards.
It is dangerous to speak on experiments one plans to do. I will answer the question privately afterwards. We have some ideas, but I would prefer not to discuss it here in the public. Sorry.
Any other question or comments?
Welcome, Mexico, Usnai. For you, experience MEDAX shock nationax. También for with technologies, security prevention, one tsunami. Thank you. Welcome, Mexico, Usnai.
Thank you very much.
Questions, comments, remarks? Okay, let's thank Professor Stockman for his interesting talk. Then before we invite you to enjoy a Honor wine, Professor Luis Felipe Rodriguez will close the activities.
Well, thank you very much, Alfredo. I just have some acknowledgments to make. Of course, Alfredo Macias, who chaired the organizing committees, and all the members of the committees. We also would like to thank our supporting institutions, in particular the Metropolitan University and El Colegio Nacional. All of you for being here and attending and giving very nice and very clear talks. And finally, as Alfredo said, we invite you all to go downstairs and share some wine and snacks with us right now, right? And thank you very much and have a safe return home. Thank you.